Krystal Ball, who is the host of The Hills Rising, as you guys are all aware, appeared once again on CNN's New Day show. This time, I believe, being across from Ana Navarro, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this video clip is actually only going to include the parts where Krystal Ball is speaking, but she's going to talk about Bernie Sanders' electability, going into depth about Bernie Sanders' electability. But she's asked here the same bogus question that we saw yesterday with Nina Turner, where Nina Turner was being asked these propaganda questions by Brooke Baldwin, who's probably fed them from her uppers at CNN, the overlords at CNN. They're trying to do the same thing here, trying to ask her about, 70+% of people say they're not comfortable voting for a socialist, and then Bernie Sanders is leading the poll. And so they're trying to do this really stupid fear-mongering stuff and just this concern trolling, but she shuts it down.
I think Anna lays it out well. There are a couple of routes to get here, but I actually don't think you have to pick either or. And with Bernie Sanders, look, we know that he excites the base. We know he's going to bring out more young people and probably more working-class, diverse communities that stayed home in 2016. But we can look at his 30-year electoral history in Vermont to see how he does with those more moderate and conservative voters. Now, look, Vermont overall obviously is a more liberal state at this point, but there were 61 towns that voted for Donald Trump. Of those 61 towns, Bernie Sanders won 47 of them. Now, compare that to Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts, where there were 91 towns that went for Trump. She was only able to win back 4 of them. So we can see actually Bernie Sanders has outperformed in the kind of deindustrialized towns in Vermont that are very similar to those key swing states in the industrial Midwest. Yeah, but if you look at the polling, when it's not just some hypothetical socialist, the polling shows that Bernie Sanders is the best candidate in terms of electability versus Trump at this point. It used to be Biden. Sanders has closed that gap now to where he consistently outperforms Biden on that measure of electability. Look, I think the bottom line is, and this is core to my own political philosophy, economic populism is an electoral winner. Why? Because it's a unifying message across the working class. Bernie Sanders focusing on health care, on wages, on labor rights, on clean air and clean water. These are things that are not partisan issues, as he loves to say, which I think is a great point. Republicans get sick too. They care about their health care as well. And to the point about the Latino community and the importance there, that is an incredibly important electorate with very diverse views, and I never want to paint with a broad brush. But if we look in this primary, there's one candidate who disproportionately outperforms with Latinos, and that's Bernie Sanders. That's why he's very likely to win the Nevada caucuses. We've seen polling that have shown him up over 50% with Democratic primary voters in the Latino community. So his strength there is also going to be incredibly important in many of these swing states.
And so, obviously, Krystal's on the money there, okay? And this is what's so hilarious about it, right? You see that number, but then you don't also look at, what are the polling numbers in terms of who's winning in the polls in the general election. National polls, it's Bernie Sanders. In the primary election, national polls and state-by-state polls, it's like, dude, he's winning all of the polls now. Virtually every poll that comes out, he's winning. So it's almost like instantaneously debunked, that whole thing. And so, the point Nina was trying to make was, hey, don't go by the label, go by the issues. And that's a very important point because a lot of people don't end up being able to match labels with issues. But also, if you look at something like what people identify as, I think it's there isn't a majority of people in the country who identify as liberal. In fact, I think it's the smallest group. But when you go issue by issue, people for the most part agree on those issues. And so that's why it's not really a legitimate way to look at it by going by labels, because people treat labels differently. They're very reactive towards labels, and so therefore they might not take on the labels, or they might reject the labels and whatnot. So that's why it's a bad idea to do that. And so that was the point Nina Turner was trying to make. They were trying to get her to give her a different answer for some reason, obviously because it was the narrative of their corporate overlords at CNN. But Krystal Ball is saying the same thing here. Look, dude, look at the actual polls. Stop concern trolling. Look at the fucking polls. He's literally winning. If that's true, then why is Bernie Sanders leading the polls in general election numbers against Donald Trump, as well as state by state and national polls in the primary? These two things are clearly they're contradictory. They're mutually exclusive. And so it's just ridiculous. And so that's the point people are trying to make. CNN trying to push this propaganda piece, of course, of, oh, look, voters don't want to vote for a Democratic socialist, so let's not vote for Bernie Sanders as the nominee. And then obviously Krystal Ball on point about Bernie Sanders' electability in the other portions that she talks about. And again, very crucial just to have that voice on CNN, because it opens up the minds of so many people, changes so many people's minds on the issue. And the corporate media is where people get all of their stuff from. And so that is why right there that it's so crucial to have someone like Krystal Ball on there. So yeah, so this is really awesome.